The evening sun was setting over Byron Bay as Chris Hemsworth walked into the Ocean Pearl restaurant. He pulled his baseball cap down low over his eyes and chose a small table in the corner. The restaurant was not fancy, but it was clean and warm. Local people came here often and the food was good. Chris looked around the room. There were about 20 tables and most of them had people eating dinner. Families sat together talking and laughing. A young couple shared a pizza near the window. An older man read a newspaper while eating soup. Everyone seemed happy and relaxed. Chris was not relaxed. He kept looking at his phone. His fingers moved quickly as he typed message after message. He would read something, frown, then type again. The phone never seemed to leave his hands. A waitress named Sarah walked over to his table. She had short brown hair and a friendly smile. She had been working at the Ocean Pearl for 2 years. Sarah knew who Chris was, but she also knew he liked to be treated like any other customer. "Good evening," Sarah said softly. "Would you like to see the menu?" Chris looked up from his phone for just a moment. He made some movements with his hands. His fingers moved in patterns that looked like he was trying to say something. Sarah watched his hands carefully and nodded. "The fish special is very good tonight," Sarah said, also moving her hands as she spoke. Chris smiled for the first time that evening. He made more hand movements, pointing to different items on the menu that Sarah had placed on his table. Sarah watched his hands and nodded again. "I will bring you some water while you decide," she said. As Sarah walked away, Chris went back to his phone. His face looked worried. He typed quickly, stopped, then typed again. Sometimes he would look toward the kitchen door at the back of the restaurant. At a table nearby, a man in an expensive suit was eating dinner alone. His name was Marcus Wellington, and he owned 3 stores in the area. Marcus had noticed Chris when he walked in. Everyone in Byron Bay knew what Chris Hemsworth looked like. Marcus watched as Sarah came back to Chris's table with a glass of water. Chris was still looking at his phone. Sarah stood next to the table and waited. She said something, but Chris did not look up. Sarah waited a little longer, then walked away. Marcus felt annoyed. He thought Chris was being rude to the waitress. Marcus believed that famous people should treat working people with respect. A few minutes later, Sarah returned to Chris's table. This time she had a small notepad ready to write down his order. Chris was still typing on his phone. Sarah waited patiently beside the table. Chris finally looked up. He made hand movements again, but this time he looked worried and distracted. Sarah moved her hands back to him. They seemed to be having a conversation, but not with words. Marcus could not understand what was happening. From where he sat, it looked like Chris was barely paying attention to Sarah. Marcus thought Chris was acting like Sarah was not important enough for his time. Sarah walked away again without writing anything on her notepad. Marcus felt his anger growing. He had seen enough rude behavior from rich and famous people. He decided that someone needed to speak up for the working people. Chris continued to stare at his phone. Every few minutes he would look toward the kitchen door. Sometimes he would check his watch. He seemed to be waiting for something or someone. The restaurant was getting busier as more people came for dinner. A family with 3 children sat at the table next to Marcus. The children were excited and loud, talking about their day at the beach. Their parents were trying to help them choose what to eat. At another table, 2 women were celebrating a birthday. They had ordered a cake and were taking pictures with their phones. Everyone in the restaurant seemed happy except for Chris, who still looked worried. Sarah came back to Chris's table a 3rd time. She had brought another waitress with her. The second waitress also seemed to know how to use hand movements. Both women stood by Chris's table, and all 3 of them had a conversation using their hands. Marcus was getting more upset. Now Chris was taking up 2 waitresses' time. Marcus thought about all the other customers who might need help. He felt that Chris was being selfish and rude. After a few minutes, both waitresses walked away from Chris's table. Chris went back to his phone immediately. He typed faster now, and his face looked more worried than before. Marcus looked around the restaurant. Some other customers had noticed what was happening at Chris's table. A few people were whispering to each other and looking in Chris's direction. Marcus felt that someone needed to do something. Sarah brought a plate of bread to Chris's table. Chris looked up and made hand movements to say thank you, but then he went right back to his phone. He picked up a piece of bread but did not eat it. Instead, he held it in one hand while typing with the other hand. Marcus had seen enough. He felt that Chris was treating Sarah and the other restaurant workers badly. Marcus believed that just because someone was famous did not give them the right to be rude to working people. The kitchen door opened and a young man looked out. He was wearing a white kitchen uniform and looked to be about 18 years old. He saw Chris and waved with excitement. Chris waved back and made hand movements. The young man made hand movements back to Chris, then disappeared into the kitchen again. Marcus did not understand what he had just seen. He thought Chris was just showing off and trying to get attention from the kitchen staff too. Chris's phone rang, and he answered it quickly. He spoke in a low voice, trying not to disturb other customers. But Marcus could hear some of the conversation. "Yes, everything is ready," Chris said quietly. "Are you sure they will all be here? This is very important to me." Chris listened to whoever was on the phone, then said, "I have been working on this for months. It has to be perfect." Marcus thought Chris was probably talking about some movie or business deal. He felt even more annoyed that Chris was conducting business in the restaurant while ignoring the waitresses. Sarah walked past Marcus's table, carrying plates to another customer. Marcus stopped her. "Excuse me," Marcus said. "Is everything okay with that customer over there?" He pointed toward Chris's table. Sarah looked surprised. "Yes, sir. Everything is fine. Is there something I can help you with?" Marcus felt that Sarah was just being polite because she had to be nice to customers. He thought she was probably upset about how Chris was treating her, but could not say anything because Chris was famous. "I just think all customers should treat staff with respect," Marcus said. Sarah looked confused. "Of course, sir. All our customers are very kind." But Marcus was not satisfied with her answer. He decided that someone needed to stand up for Sarah and the other workers. If Chris Hemsworth thought he could treat working people badly just because he was famous, Marcus was going to let him know that was not acceptable. Marcus finished his dinner quickly. He was preparing to do something that would change the entire evening for everyone in the restaurant. Marcus Wellington pushed his plate away and kept watching Chris Hemsworth's table. The more he watched, the more upset he became. From his seat across the restaurant, everything looked wrong to Marcus. Sarah approached Chris's table again, carrying a small tray with salt and pepper. Chris was typing on his phone with both hands, his head down. Sarah stood beside the table and waited. She cleared her throat softly, but Chris did not look up. Sarah waited for almost a minute. She shifted from one foot to the other, still holding the tray. Other customers at nearby tables started to notice that the waitress was just standing there. Finally, Chris looked up from his phone. He glanced at Sarah quickly, made a few quick hand movements, then went back to his phone. Sarah placed the salt and pepper on the table and walked away. Marcus felt his face getting hot with anger. To him, it looked like Chris had barely acknowledged Sarah's presence. Marcus thought Chris was treating Sarah like she was not even human. "This is terrible," Marcus said quietly to himself. "Just because he is famous, he thinks he can treat people like dirt." At the table next to Marcus, an elderly woman was having dinner with her adult daughter. The woman had also noticed what was happening at Chris's table. "Is that really Chris Hemsworth?" the elderly woman whispered to her daughter. "I think so, Mother," the daughter replied. "But he does not look very friendly tonight." Marcus heard their conversation and felt even more justified in his anger. Other people were noticing Chris's behavior too. A few minutes later, Sarah returned to Chris's table with a water pitcher to refill his glass. Chris's phone was ringing and he answered it while Sarah was pouring the water. "Not now," Chris said into the phone. "I told you I would call you back in an hour." Chris hung up the phone and immediately started typing a text message. Sarah finished filling his water glass and stood there holding the pitcher. She was clearly waiting for something, but Chris was completely focused on his phone. Sarah made some hand movements toward Chris. Marcus could not understand what she was doing, but it looked like she was trying to get Chris's attention in some strange way. Chris looked up for just a second. He made one quick hand movement back to Sarah, then returned to his phone. Sarah waited a moment longer, then walked away with the water pitcher. Marcus had seen enough. In his mind, Chris had just dismissed Sarah rudely while she was trying to do her job. Marcus felt that Chris was showing complete disrespect for working people. Someone needs to teach this guy some manners, Marcus thought to himself. The restaurant was getting busier. More families were coming in for dinner, and Sarah was getting busier too. She was taking care of several tables, bringing food and drinks to customers. But every few minutes, she would check on Chris's table. Each time Sarah went to Chris's table, the same thing happened. Chris would be focused on his phone. Sarah would wait patiently. Chris would barely look up, make a few hand movements, then go back to his phone. Marcus started counting how many times this happened. By his count, Sarah had been to Chris's table 6 times in 30 minutes, and each time Chris had barely paid attention to her. This is getting ridiculous, Marcus thought. That poor waitress is trying to do her job, and this spoiled actor thinks he is too important to be polite. Marcus looked around the restaurant. Other customers were starting to notice the situation too. A young couple at a corner table kept looking over at Chris. A family with teenagers was whispering and pointing in Chris's direction. Marcus felt that someone needed to speak up for all the working people who could not defend themselves against rude celebrities. He thought about his own employees and how he would feel if someone treated them the way Chris was treating Sarah. Sarah walked past Marcus's table again, carrying dirty dishes to the kitchen. Marcus noticed that she looked tired and stressed. He assumed it was because Chris was making her job difficult. "Excuse me, miss," Marcus called to Sarah. Sarah stopped and turned to him with a polite smile. "Yes, sir. Is everything okay with your meal?" "My meal is fine," Marcus said. "But I can see that you are having trouble with that customer over there." He pointed toward Chris's table. Sarah looked confused. "Trouble? I'm sorry, I don't understand." "The actor," Marcus said. "He keeps ignoring you and treating you rudely. You don't have to put up with that kind of behavior even from famous people." Sarah's eyes widened with surprise. "Oh no, sir, you have it all wrong. Mr. Hemsworth is one of our nicest customers. He has never been rude to anyone here." Marcus felt frustrated. He thought Sarah was just being professional and trying to protect the restaurant's reputation. But Marcus had seen what he had seen. "I have been watching," Marcus said firmly. "Every time you go to his table, he ignores you and acts like you are not important. That is not how people should treat working folks." Sarah looked even more confused. "Sir, I think there might be a misunderstanding. Mr. Hemsworth is always very kind and respectful." Marcus did not believe her. He thought Sarah was just saying what she had to say because she needed her job. Marcus felt that working people were often forced to accept bad treatment from rich and powerful customers. "Listen," Marcus said, leaning forward. "I own 3 businesses in this town. I know how customers should treat employees. What I see happening over there is not acceptable." Sarah looked uncomfortable. "Sir, I really think you might be misunderstanding the situation." "I know what I see," Marcus said firmly. "And what I see is a spoiled celebrity who thinks he is too good to show basic respect to the people serving him." Sarah glanced nervously toward Chris's table, then back at Marcus. "I need to get back to work, sir. But I promise you there is no problem." As Sarah walked away, Marcus felt more convinced that he was right. Sarah was clearly trying to protect Chris because she was afraid of losing her job or causing trouble for the restaurant. Marcus watched as Sarah went back to Chris's table. Chris was on his phone again, this time talking to someone. Sarah stood next to the table with a notepad, ready to take his order. Chris held up one finger, telling Sarah to wait while he finished his phone call. To Marcus, this looked like Chris was telling Sarah that his phone call was more important than her time. "I understand," Chris said into the phone, "but make sure everyone knows to be here by 8 o'clock. This cannot be delayed." Chris hung up and immediately started typing another text message. Sarah continued to stand there with her notepad, waiting patiently. Marcus felt his anger boiling over. Chris had just made Sarah wait while he handled his personal business. Then, instead of giving Sarah his attention, Chris went right back to his phone. "That's it," Marcus said to himself. "Someone needs to tell this guy what real respect looks like." Marcus stood up from his table. He had made up his mind. He was going to walk over to Chris Hemsworth's table and tell him exactly what he thought about people who treat working folks badly. The other customers in the restaurant had no idea that Marcus was about to create a scene that would change everyone's understanding of what was really happening that evening. Marcus straightened his tie and walked toward Chris's table with determined steps. Marcus walked across the restaurant with heavy steps. His face was red with anger, and his hands were clenched into fists. Other customers began to notice that something was about to happen. Chris was still looking at his phone when Marcus reached his table. Sarah had walked away to help another customer, leaving Chris alone with his water glass and the untouched bread. "Excuse me," Marcus said loudly, standing right next to Chris's table. Chris looked up from his phone with a surprised expression. He had not expected anyone to approach him. Yes? Chris said softly. I think you need to learn some manners, Marcus said, his voice getting louder. I have been watching you treat that waitress like garbage for the past hour. Chris looked confused. He glanced around the restaurant and noticed that people were starting to stare at them. I'm sorry, I think there might be some confusion, Chris said quietly. No confusion at all, Marcus said, his voice now loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. I saw exactly how you have been treating that poor girl. Ignoring her, making her wait while you play with your phone, acting like she is not even worth your time. The family at the nearby table stopped eating and turned to watch. The elderly woman and her daughter put down their forks and listened carefully. Other customers began to notice the commotion. Chris stood up slowly from his chair. He was much taller than Marcus, but he kept his voice calm and low. Sir, I think you might not understand what was happening. I was not trying to be rude to anyone. Not trying to be rude? Marcus said even louder. You made that waitress stand there and wait while you talked on your phone like she was invisible. You barely looked at her when she was trying to do her job. More people in the restaurant were now watching the argument. Some customers took out their phones and started recording. The young couple in the corner whispered to each other and pointed at the scene. I think maybe we should talk about this more quietly, Chris said, still keeping his voice down. I do not want to disturb other people's dinner. Oh, now you care about other people? Marcus said sarcastically. Where was that consideration when you were treating the staff like servants? A woman at a table near the window stood up to get a better view. Her husband tried to pull her back down, but she wanted to see what was happening. Children at another table stared with wide eyes while their parents tried to distract them. Sarah was at the other side of the restaurant when she heard Marcus's loud voice. She looked over and saw the argument happening at Chris's table. She quickly finished taking an order from another customer and hurried over to help. Is everything okay here? Sarah asked as she approached the table. Everything is not okay, Marcus said, turning to Sarah. This man has been treating you terribly all evening, and I am tired of watching it. Sarah looked shocked. Mr. Wellington, I think there has been a misunderstanding. Mr. Hemsworth has been nothing but kind to me. You do not have to protect him, Marcus said firmly. I saw how he ignored you and made you wait. I saw how he barely looked at you when you were trying to serve him. That is not how decent people behave. Chris tried to speak again. Sir, if you would just let me explain what was actually happening. I do not need any explanations. Marcus interrupted loudly. I know what I saw. You think because you are a famous actor, you can treat working people like they do not matter. The restaurant manager, a middle-aged man named David, heard the commotion and came out from behind the front desk. He walked quickly toward the arguing table, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. Gentlemen, please, David said as he approached. Let us try to resolve this calmly. We do not want to disturb our other customers. The only disturbance here, Marcus said, pointing at Chris, is this man's rude behavior toward your staff. Someone needs to tell him that money and fame do not give him the right to treat people badly. Chris looked around the restaurant and saw that almost everyone was watching them now. Some people were holding up their phones, recording everything. Chris looked uncomfortable and embarrassed by all the attention. I really think there has been a big misunderstanding, Chris said, trying one more time to speak calmly. If you would just give me a chance to explain. Explain what? Marcus said loudly. Explain why you think you are better than everyone else. Explain why a waitress is not worth your basic politeness. Sarah stepped closer to the table. Mr. Wellington, please, you really do not understand what was happening. Mr. Hemsworth was not being rude at all. Stop protecting him, Marcus said to Sarah. I know you probably feel like you have to be nice to him because he is famous and you need your job. But working people deserve respect from everyone, no matter how rich or famous they are. Other customers were now standing up from their tables to get a better view of the argument. The restaurant had become completely focused on the drama happening at Chris's table. A teenage boy at a table near the kitchen took out his phone and started live streaming the argument on social media. This is crazy, he whispered to his friends. Chris Hemsworth is getting yelled at in a restaurant. Chris noticed the phones and cameras pointed at him. He looked more and more uncomfortable. Please, he said quietly to Marcus. I understand you think you are doing the right thing, But you really do not have all the information about what was happening here. I have enough information, Marcus said angrily. I have eyes. I can see how you treat people. And what I see is someone who thinks he is too important to show basic human decency to a hard-working waitress. David, the restaurant manager, tried again to calm the situation. Perhaps we could move this conversation to my office where it would be more private? No, Marcus said firmly. This conversation needs to happen right here, where everyone can see it. People need to know that fame does not give anyone the right to be cruel to working folks. Chris sat back down in his chair and put his head in his hands. The situation was spiraling out of control, and he could not seem to make Marcus understand that everything was not what it appeared to be. Sarah looked around the restaurant at all the people watching and recording. She realized that this misunderstanding was about to become much bigger than just an argument between two customers. Mr. Wellington, Sarah said firmly, you need to stop this right now. You are completely wrong about what was happening here. But Marcus was too angry to listen to anyone. He was convinced that he was standing up for working people everywhere against a rude and entitled celebrity. The argument was about to take a turn that no one in the restaurant expected. The entire restaurant had now become focused on the argument at Chris's table. What had started as a quiet evening was turning into a public spectacle that no one could ignore. Marcus was not finished with his speech. His voice grew even louder as more people watched. This is exactly what is wrong with celebrities today, he announced to the whole restaurant. They think money and fame make them better than everyone else. A woman with her teenage daughter at a table near the window was recording everything on her phone. Are you getting this? She whispered to her daughter. This is going to be all over the internet tomorrow. Chris remained sitting in his chair looking down at his hands. The baseball cap he wore could not hide the embarrassment on his face. Every few seconds he would look up and see more phones pointed at him. Look at him, Marcus continued, gesturing toward Chris. He cannot even apologize for his behavior. He just sits there like he is too good to admit when he is wrong. Sarah stepped between Marcus and Chris's table. Mr. Wellington, please stop this, she said firmly. You are making a big mistake. The only mistake here, Marcus replied loudly, is that nobody else stood up to call out this kind of behavior. Everyone is too scared to tell a famous person when they are acting badly. David, the restaurant manager, was getting desperate to control the situation. He could see that this was going to be terrible for the restaurant's reputation. Sir, I really must insist that we handle this more quietly, he said to Marcus. Quietly? Marcus said, turning to face David. Is that how you handle it when customers treat your staff badly? You just keep it quiet so the famous people do not get embarrassed? The family with 3 children at the nearby table was trying to leave without getting involved in the drama. The father put money on the table while the mother gathered their coats. The children kept looking back at Chris and Marcus as their parents hurried them toward the door. A man at the bar area stood up and walked closer to get a better view. Is that really Chris Hemsworth? He asked the woman next to him. Yes, she replied. And he is getting called out for being rude to the waitress. More customers were taking out their phones now. The teenage boy who had been live streaming was getting hundreds of comments from people watching online. This is going viral, he whispered excitedly to his friends. Chris finally stood up again. He was much taller than Marcus, and for a moment Marcus stepped back. But Chris's voice remained calm and quiet. Sir, I understand that you think you are protecting Sarah, Chris said. But I promise you there has been a misunderstanding about what was happening here tonight. Stop calling it a misunderstanding, Marcus shot back. I saw what I saw. You ignored that waitress, you made her wait. You treated her like she was not important. That is not a misunderstanding. That is just bad behavior. The elderly woman and her daughter at the nearby table were listening to every word. He does seem pretty rude, the daughter whispered to her mother. I mean, why would that man make all this up? I do not know, the mother replied quietly. But this is quite a scene. I feel bad for everyone involved. Sarah tried once more to defend Chris. Mr. Wellington, you really do not understand what you saw. Mr. Hemsworth was not ignoring me. We were communicating just fine. Communicating? Marcus said sarcastically. Is that what you call it when someone barely looks at you and acts like you are bothering them? A young couple near the kitchen area was recording everything on both of their phones. They were whispering to each other about how this was the most exciting thing that had ever happened during their dinner out. Chris looked around the restaurant at all the people watching and recording. He could see that anything he said now would be shared online within minutes. He looked tired and defeated. "I think maybe I should just leave," Chris said quietly to Sarah and David. "No way," Marcus said loudly. "You do not get to just walk away without apologizing to this waitress for how you treated her." "But he does not need to apologize," Sarah said, her voice getting frustrated. "He did not do anything wrong." "Of course you have to say that," Marcus replied. "You probably need this job. You cannot afford to make a famous customer angry, even when he treats you badly." David was becoming more worried by the minute. He could see customers recording everything, and he knew this would be all over social media soon. "Perhaps we could all sit down and discuss this calmly," he suggested. "I am calm," Marcus said, though his red face and loud voice suggested otherwise. "I am just tired of watching working people get treated like garbage by people who think they are special." The woman who had been live streaming turned to her friend. "This guy is really going after Chris Hemsworth. I wonder what actually happened." "Sounds like Chris was being a total jerk to the waitress," her friend replied. "Good for this guy for standing up to him." Chris looked at his phone, which had been buzzing with messages and calls. The people he had been coordinating with were probably wondering why he was not responding. But now he could not focus on anything except the growing scene around his table. "You know what the worst part is?" Marcus continued, now clearly performing for the audience of customers who were watching. "People like him never learn because everyone is always too afraid to tell them the truth." A man near the bar called out. "What did he do exactly?" Marcus turned to address the whole restaurant. "This man spent the last hour treating our waitress like she was invisible, ignoring her, making her wait while he played with his phone, acting like she was not worth his time." Several people in the restaurant made disapproving sounds. A woman shook her head and said, "That is terrible. Famous people should know better." Chris heard these comments and looked even more upset. He tried to speak to the room. "Please, everyone, there really has been a misunderstanding about what was happening here." "Stop saying it was a misunderstanding," Marcus interrupted loudly. "We all have eyes. We can see how you behave." Sarah was getting more and more frustrated. She could see that the situation was spinning completely out of control, and no one was listening to her when she tried to explain that Marcus was wrong. The kitchen door opened slightly, and several staff members peered out to see what was happening. Word was spreading through the whole restaurant that Chris Hemsworth was being confronted by an angry customer. David made one last attempt to control the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen, please let us all try to resolve this privately." But it was too late. The scene had taken on a life of its own, and Marcus was not going to stop until he felt like justice had been served. The restaurant was completely silent for a moment. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Marcus stood with his arms crossed, looking satisfied that he had made his point. Chris sat quietly, looking defeated and embarrassed. Then Sarah did something that surprised everyone. She stepped forward and raised her voice so the whole restaurant could hear her. "Stop," Sarah said loudly and firmly. "All of you need to stop right now." The restaurant became even quieter. Everyone turned to look at Sarah, who had been quiet and polite all evening. Now she looked angry and determined. "Mr. Wellington," Sarah said, looking directly at Marcus. "You have been watching us all evening, but you do not understand what you saw." Marcus looked surprised that Sarah was speaking up so strongly. "I understand perfectly," he said. "I saw how he treated you." "No," Sarah said, shaking her head. "You saw something, but you do not know what it was." She turned to face the entire restaurant. All the customers with their phones and cameras were now focused on her instead of Chris. "Mr. Hemsworth was not ignoring me," Sarah announced to everyone. "We were talking to each other the whole time." A woman near the window called out, "But he barely looked at you." "We all saw that." Sarah took a deep breath. "We were talking, but not with words. We were using sign language." The restaurant erupted in confused murmurs. People looked at each other with puzzled expressions. Marcus frowned and shook his head. "Sign language?" Marcus said. "That is ridiculous. I saw him playing with his phone and ignoring you." Sarah moved her hands in the same patterns that Chris had been using all evening. Her fingers moved gracefully through the air, making shapes and gestures that suddenly looked meaningful instead of random. "This is sign language," Sarah said as she moved her hands. "I just told you that you made a big mistake tonight." Chris looked up from his chair with surprise and gratitude. For the first time all evening, he looked hopeful that someone might understand what had really been happening. Sarah continued speaking to the restaurant while also moving her hands. Mr. Hemsworth has been learning sign language for months. He comes here regularly to practice with me because I am one of the few people in town who knows it. A man at the bar area called out, "Why would he need to learn sign language?" Sarah looked toward the kitchen door. Because someone very important to him cannot hear. The teenage boy who had been live streaming looked confused. Wait, so he was not being rude? He was being the opposite of rude, Sarah said firmly. He was trying very hard to communicate respectfully in a language that is new to him. Marcus still looked skeptical, but he was on his phone constantly. I saw him ignoring you while he typed messages. He was coordinating something special, Sarah said, something that required a lot of planning and timing. Chris finally spoke up, his voice still quiet but more confident now that Sarah was helping to explain. I was trying to organize a surprise. Sarah was helping me make sure everything would work properly. The woman who had been recording put down her phone and looked embarrassed. Oh my God, she said quietly. I think I just recorded myself being completely wrong about something. David, the restaurant manager, looked relieved that the truth was finally coming out. Perhaps now we can all understand that there was no problem here. But Marcus was not ready to give up. Even if that is true, he said stubbornly, it still looked rude from the outside. He should have been more aware of how his behavior appeared to other people. Sarah turned to face Marcus directly. Mr. Wellington, when someone is learning sign language, they have to concentrate very hard. It takes focus and practice. Mr. Hemsworth was working harder to be polite and respectful than most customers ever do. An elderly man near the kitchen area stood up slowly. He had been quietly watching the entire argument. Young lady, he said to Sarah, are you saying this man was learning sign language to talk to someone who is deaf? Yes, sir, Sarah replied. And he has been working very hard at it for months. The elderly man looked at Marcus with disappointment. Then shame on you, sir, for attacking someone who was trying to do something good. Marcus's face began to change. The anger was being replaced by uncertainty. But I saw what I saw, he said. But his voice was not as loud or confident as before. You saw what you thought you saw, Sarah corrected him. But you did not understand what it meant. Chris stood up again and began moving his hands in sign language. His movements were careful and deliberate, like someone who had been practicing hard but was still learning. Sarah watched his hands and then spoke to the restaurant. He just said that he is sorry for any confusion, and he never meant to make anyone uncomfortable. A woman at a corner table called out, "Can you ask him why he was learning sign language?" Sarah looked at Chris, who nodded. He made more hand gestures and Sarah translated. He says there is someone very special who cannot hear, and he wanted to be able to communicate better with that person. The mood in the restaurant was beginning to shift. People were putting down their phones and looking at Marcus with different expressions. Some looked disappointed in him, while others just looked confused about what had really happened. Marcus was starting to realize that he had made a terrible mistake. But it really did look like he was being rude, he said weakly. That is the problem, Sarah said. You decided what you thought was happening without asking any questions. You just assumed the worst. The teenage boy who had been live streaming looked at his phone with panic. Oh no, this is still broadcasting live. Everyone online thinks Chris Hemsworth is a jerk. But he is actually doing something nice, Chris made more hand gestures to Sarah. She nodded and turned back to the restaurant. Mr. Hemsworth wants everyone to know that he understands why it might have looked strange. He says he should have been more aware of how it appeared to others. But Sarah was not finished. She looked around the restaurant at all the people who had been watching and judging. However, she continued, there is more to this story that you all need to know. Sarah looked around the restaurant at all the faces watching her. She could see that people were beginning to understand that they had been wrong about Chris. But she knew they still did not know the whole story. You all want to know why Mr. Hemsworth was learning sign language, Sarah said clearly. The reason is more beautiful than any of you could imagine. Chris looked at Sarah with a mixture of gratitude and nervousness. He made a few hand gestures to her and she nodded. He is learning sign language, Sarah continued, because of my little brother. A woman near the window leaned forward with interest. Your brother? My brother Danny, Sarah said with a proud smile. He is 18 years old and he was born deaf. He works in the kitchen here at the restaurant. The kitchen door opened and a young man in a white chef's uniform appeared. He had Sarah's same brown hair and friendly face. He looked nervous about all the attention, but he waved shyly at the dining room. Danny has been working here for 6 months, Sarah explained. Mr. Hemsworth noticed him right away because Danny is always so happy and hard-working. Chris stood up and walked toward Danny. When he reached the young man, Chris began moving his hands in sign language. Danny's face lit up with a huge smile, and he signed back enthusiastically. The entire restaurant watched this silent conversation between Chris and Danny. Even though most people could not understand the hand movements, they could see the joy and friendship between the two young men. Mr. Hemsworth started coming here regularly just to meet Danny. Sarah continued. He wanted to be able to talk to him properly, so he found a sign language teacher and started taking lessons. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He was beginning to realize how wrong he had been about everything. Sarah was not finished with her story. But that is not all, she said. Mr. Hemsworth learned that Danny dreams of going to college to study cooking. Danny is incredibly talented, but college is expensive. Chris and Danny finished their conversation and both of them were smiling. Chris patted Danny on the shoulder and Danny gave him a thumbs up before going back into the kitchen. 3 months ago, Sarah continued, Mr. Hemsworth secretly set up a scholarship fund for deaf students who want to study culinary arts. Tonight was supposed to be the surprise announcement. The restaurant was completely silent. Everyone was trying to understand what they had just learned. A man at the bar area spoke up. You mean he was not being rude at all? He was actually trying to help people? Not just help, Sarah said. He has been working for months to create opportunities for deaf students all over the region. Tonight, 5 students were supposed to find out that their college dreams were coming true. The woman who had been recording earlier put her hand over her mouth. Oh my God, what have we done? Sarah pulled out her own phone and showed it to the restaurant. All evening, Mr. Hemsworth was coordinating with the scholarship committee, the college representatives, and the families of the students. That is why he was on his phone so much. Chris looked embarrassed by all the attention on his good deeds. He made hand gestures to Sarah, asking her to stop talking about it. He does not want me to tell you all this, Sarah translated. He likes to help people privately. He never wants credit or attention for the good things he does. Marcus felt like the floor was falling out from under him. I had no idea, he said quietly. Of course you had no idea, Sarah said, her voice becoming firm again. Because you did not ask. You just decided that you knew what was happening and you attacked a good man who was trying to do something wonderful. David, the restaurant manager, stepped forward. Sarah is telling the truth, he confirmed. Mr. Hemsworth has been planning this scholarship surprise for months. He specifically asked us to help him keep it secret until tonight. A teenage girl at a nearby table started crying. We all thought he was being mean, but he was actually being amazing. The elderly man who had spoken earlier shook his head sadly. This is a lesson for all of us about jumping to conclusions. Sarah looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Hemsworth comes here twice a week, not for the food or because he likes being recognized. He comes here to practice sign language with me and to spend time with Danny. Marcus felt sick to his stomach, but it really looked like he was ignoring you, he said weakly. He was concentrating, Sarah explained patiently. Learning sign language as an adult is very hard. Every conversation requires focus and effort. He was not ignoring me. He was trying his hardest to communicate. Respectfully, Chris made more hand gestures to Sarah. She watched carefully and then addressed the restaurant. Again, Mr. Hemsworth wants to apologize to everyone for the confusion. He says he should have been more aware that his behavior might be misunderstood. He should not have to apologize, called out a woman from across the room. We should be apologizing to him. The teenage boy who had been live streaming looked at his phone in panic. This is still broadcasting. Everyone online saw us accusing him of being rude, but he is actually like a real-life superhero. Sarah continued her explanation. Every week, Mr. Hemsworth brings new books about cooking for Danny. He pays for Danny's sign language tutoring. He even helped Danny get his driver's license. Chris looked more and more uncomfortable with all the praise. He sat back down at his table and tried to hide behind his baseball cap. The scholarship announcement was supposed to happen tonight, Sarah said. The 5 students and their families were going to meet here at 8 o'clock. Mr. Hemsworth wanted to surprise them and tell them their education would be paid for. A man near the kitchen asked, "Will that still happen?" Sarah looked at Chris, who shrugged and made a few hand gestures. He says he does not know if the families will still come after all this drama. Sarah translated. He is worried that tonight is ruined. Marcus felt worse and worse as he understood the full extent of what he had done. I have ruined something wonderful, he said quietly. Yes, Sarah said bluntly. You have. Because you decided to judge someone without knowing the facts. The entire restaurant was now looking at Marcus with disappointment and anger. He had gone from being the hero standing up for working people to being the villain who had attacked someone doing charitable work. Is there anything we can do to fix this? Asked the woman who had been recording. Sarah looked at the clock on the wall. It was almost 8 o'clock. I do not know, she said. We will have to see if the families still come. Marcus stood in the middle of the restaurant, feeling like the worst person in the world. Around him, customers were looking at him with expressions ranging from disappointment to anger. The man who had thought he was defending working people had actually attacked someone who was secretly helping students achieve their dreams. I am so sorry, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought I was doing the right thing. Chris looked up from his table. Despite everything that had happened, his expression was kind rather than angry. He made hand gestures to Sarah. Mr. Hemsworth says he understands why you thought what you thought, Sarah translated. He says the situation did look confusing from the outside, but Marcus shook his head. No, there is no excuse for what I did. I should have asked questions before I made accusations. The woman who had been live streaming approached Marcus's table. Sir, my recording is still live online. Thousands of people have been watching this whole thing. They all think Chris Hemsworth is rude, but now we know he is actually wonderful. Marcus felt even worse. You mean this whole misunderstanding is being broadcast to thousands of people? Yes, the woman said. And they all saw you attacking him for something he did not do. The teenage boy with his phone looked worried. The comments online are really angry. People are calling Chris all kinds of terrible names. Sarah looked at the time again. It is almost 8 o'clock. I hope the families still come for the scholarship announcement. As if summoned by her words, the front door of the restaurant opened. A middle-aged Hispanic woman walked in, followed by a young man who looked nervous and excited. Behind them came 2 more families, each with teenagers who kept looking around the restaurant curiously. Mrs. Rodriguez, Sarah called out with relief. You came. The Hispanic woman smiled and waved. Her son, who was about 18, was moving his hands in sign language as he talked to his mother. The other families were also using sign language to communicate with their teenage children. Chris stood up when he saw the families arrive. His face showed relief and happiness for the first time all evening. He began moving his hands in sign language, greeting each family as they approached. The customers in the restaurant watched in amazement as Chris communicated fluently with all 5 deaf teenagers and their families. His sign language was careful but clear, and everyone could see the joy on the faces of the young people as they talked with him. These are the scholarship recipients, Sarah announced to the restaurant. These 5 amazing students are going to college because Mr. Hemsworth believed in their dreams. Marcus watched the scene and felt his heart breaking. He had almost ruined this beautiful moment with his assumptions and anger. Danny came out of the kitchen wearing a clean white chef's jacket. When he saw the other deaf students, his face lit up with excitement. All 6 young people began signing rapidly to each other, clearly thrilled to meet. Danny has been helping Mr. Hemsworth plan this surprise, Sarah explained to the watching customers. He helped identify other deaf students in the area who wanted to study cooking and culinary arts. David, the restaurant manager, brought out a large cake that had been hidden in the kitchen. The cake was decorated with congratulations messages in both English and sign language. Symbols. Chris began making a speech in sign language while Sarah translated for the hearing customers in the restaurant. Mr. Hemsworth is telling the students that he believes education should be available to everyone, regardless of any challenges they might face, Sarah translated. He is saying that these 5 students have shown incredible determination and talent. The families of the scholarship recipients began crying tears of joy. Parents hugged their children and signed thank you messages to Chris over and over again. One of the mothers, Mrs. Chen, spoke to the restaurant while her daughter translated into sign language. My daughter, Lisa, has dreamed of becoming a pastry chef since she was 10 years old, Mrs. Chen said, with tears in her eyes. We never thought we could afford to send her to culinary school. This scholarship changes everything. For our family, A young man named Antonio stepped forward and began signing while his mother translated. Antonio says that he wants to open a restaurant someday that hires deaf employees and shows the world how talented they are, his mother said. He says Mr. Hemsworth is giving him the chance to make that dream come true. The customers in the restaurant were now openly crying as they watched this beautiful scene. Many of them were filming again, but this time to capture something wonderful instead of something they thought was scandalous. Marcus could not take it anymore. He walked up to Chris and tapped him on the shoulder. When Chris turned around, Marcus dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the restaurant. "Mr. Hemsworth," Marcus said loudly so everyone could hear, "I owe you the biggest apology of my life. I attacked a good man who was doing something incredible, and I am ashamed of myself." Chris looked embarrassed by Marcus's dramatic apology. He gestured for Marcus to stand up, then began signing to him. Sarah translated Chris's words. "He says that he forgives you completely. He says that you thought you were protecting working people, and that shows you have a good heart even though you were wrong about the situation." Marcus stood up with tears in his eyes. "How can you be so kind to me after what I did?" Chris signed again, and Sarah translated. "He says that everyone makes mistakes when they do not have all the information. He says the important thing is that you cared enough about fairness to speak up, even though you were wrong about what was happening." The woman who had been live streaming held up her phone. "Everyone online needs to hear this," she said. "They need to know what really happened here tonight." She began speaking to her live audience. "Everyone who has been watching this, we were completely wrong about Chris Hemsworth. He was not being rude to anyone. He was planning a surprise scholarship announcement for deaf students. We all owe him an apology." The teenage boy who had been broadcasting also addressed his online audience. "This is the most amazing thing I have ever seen. Chris Hemsworth just gave 5 students full scholarships to college, and we almost ruined it by accusing him of being mean." Mrs. Rodriguez, the first mother who had arrived, approached Marcus. "Sir," she said gently, "I do not know what happened here before we arrived, but I want you to know that Mr. Hemsworth has changed my son's life forever." Marcus looked at her with shame. "I accused him of being rude and selfish. I could not have been more wrong. The important thing," Mrs. Rodriguez said kindly, "is that you learned the truth. Now you can help spread the word about what a good man he really is." The restaurant had completely transformed from a place of conflict into a place of celebration. The scholarship recipients and their families gathered around Chris as he officially presented each student with their award letters. Every person in the restaurant watched with tears in their eyes as dreams came true right in front of them. Marcus stood to the side, still feeling terrible about his mistakes. He watched as each family hugged Chris and thanked him through sign language and spoken words. The joy on everyone's faces made Marcus realize how close he had come to ruining something truly special. Sarah approached Marcus with a gentle expression. "Mr. Wellington, I want you to know that your heart was in the right place," she said kindly. "You thought you were protecting me and standing up for working people. That shows good character, even though you were wrong about the situation." Marcus shook his head. "But I was so completely wrong about everything. I made assumptions without asking questions. I could have ruined this whole evening for these families." "But you did not ruin it," Sarah pointed out. "The truth came out, and now everyone understands what really happened. Sometimes mistakes lead to even better outcomes." Chris finished presenting the scholarships and walked over to Marcus. He began signing, and Sarah translated his words. "Mr. Hemsworth wants to thank you," Sarah said with surprise in her voice. Marcus looked confused. "Thank me? For what?" Chris continued signing, and Sarah translated. "He says that your challenge tonight taught him an important lesson. He realized that when he is concentrating on sign language and coordinating events, he might appear distracted to other people. He says he will be more aware of that in the future." "But I attacked you unfairly," Marcus protested. Chris signed again, and Sarah translated. "He says that you were defending what you thought was right. He says the world needs more people who are willing to stand up for others, even when it is uncomfortable." The woman who had been live streaming approached the group. "Mr. Hemsworth, I have been broadcasting this whole evening online. Thousands of people saw what happened. Can I ask you to say something to the audience about what they witnessed tonight?" Chris looked uncomfortable with the attention, but he nodded. He began signing while Sarah translated for the online audience. "Mr. Hemsworth wants everyone to know that tonight was not about him. Sarah translated. It was about 5 amazing students who deserve the chance to follow their dreams. He says that these young people have worked harder than anyone to overcome challenges, and they deserve our support and admiration. Lisa, one of the scholarship recipients, stepped forward and began signing. Her mother translated her words. Lisa wants everyone to know that deaf people are capable of anything, her mother said. She says that with support and opportunity, deaf students can achieve just as much as anyone else. She wants to thank Mr. Hemsworth for believing in them. Antonio, another recipient, signed his own message while his mother translated. Antonio says that this scholarship is not just about money for school, his mother explained. It is about someone believing that deaf students have value and potential.
He says that means everything to him and his family. The customers in the restaurant began applauding.
Many of them were still filming, but now they were capturing a celebration instead of a conflict. Marcus addressed the room one more time. I want everyone here and everyone watching online to learn from my mistake tonight, he said loudly. I saw something that looked wrong to me, and I attacked someone without getting all the facts. I was completely wrong about Mr. Hemsworth, and I am ashamed of how I behaved. He turned to face Chris directly. You are a better man than I am, Marcus said. You forgave me even though I did not deserve it. You taught me that real kindness means not just standing up for people, but also taking the time to understand situations before making judgments. Chris signed something, and Sarah translated with a smile. He says that everyone deserves forgiveness, and everyone deserves the chance to learn from their mistakes. David, the restaurant manager, brought out champagne for the families and sparkling cider for the students. Tonight has been unlike any evening we have ever had at the Ocean Pearl, he announced. We have witnessed something beautiful, and we have all learned important lessons about assumptions and truth. The teenage boy who had been broadcasting looked at his phone with amazement. The comments online have completely changed, he reported. Everyone is now praising Chris Hemsworth and talking about how important it is not to judge people without knowing the whole story. Mrs. Chen, Lisa's mother, approached Marcus. Sir, I want you to know that your mistake tonight led to something wonderful. Because of all the attention online, more people now know about these scholarships and about the talents of deaf students. Marcus looked surprised. You mean something good came out of my terrible behavior? Yes, Mrs. Chen said with a smile. Sometimes our mistakes can lead to positive outcomes if we are willing to learn from them and make things right. The evening continued with celebration and conversation. The 5 scholarship families shared stories about their children's dreams and goals. Chris continued to communicate with the deaf students in sign language, clearly enjoying their company and learning from them. As the evening wound down, Marcus approached Chris one final time. Mr. Hemsworth, I promise you that I will never again make assumptions about someone without getting the full story. You have taught me a lesson I will never forget. Chris signed his response and Sarah translated. He says that the best way to honor this lesson is to share it with others. He says that if everyone takes time to understand before judging, the world will be a kinder place. The woman who had been live streaming made a final address to her online audience. Everyone who watched tonight, please remember what we learned. Do not be like us at the beginning of this evening. Do not assume you know what is happening in someone else's life. Ask questions, seek understanding, and give people the benefit of the doubt. As families began to leave the restaurant, each one stopped to thank both Chris and Marcus. They thanked Chris for changing their children's lives, and they thanked Marcus for ultimately helping to share their story with the world. Danny, Sarah's brother, came out of the kitchen one last time to say goodbye to Chris. The 2 young men had a long conversation in sign language, both of them smiling and laughing. What are they talking about? Marcus asked Sarah. Sarah watched their conversation and smiled. Danny is telling Mr. Hemsworth about his plans for culinary school. Mr. Hemsworth is giving him advice about following his dreams and working hard. As Chris prepared to leave, he stopped at Marcus's table. He extended his hand for a handshake, then pulled Marcus into a hug. Thank you for teaching me something important tonight, Chris said out loud, speaking instead of signing for the first time all evening. You showed me that I need to be more aware of how my actions appear to others. You also showed me that people with good hearts will stand up for what they think is right, even when it is difficult. Marcus left the restaurant that night as a changed man. He had learned that jumping to conclusions can hurt innocent people, but he had also learned that admitting mistakes and seeking forgiveness can lead to understanding and growth. The story of that evening spread far beyond Byron Bay. Videos of the scholarship presentation and Marcus's apology were shared millions of times online. The story became a powerful reminder that things are not always what they seem, and that taking time to understand before judging can prevent unnecessary conflict and reveal unexpected beauty. Most importantly, 5 talented students got the chance to pursue their dreams, and the world learned a little more about the capabilities and potential of deaf individuals. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from our biggest mistakes, and sometimes the most beautiful outcomes grow from the most uncomfortable moments.